The first time Diane Bennett touched my hand, I told myself it meant nothing. The second time, she left something behind, and I've spent every day since trying to figure out if my life quietly ended that afternoon or finally began. My name is David Reyes. I'm 38. I run a small contracting business out of a leased garage on the east side of town, and until that Saturday in June, the most complicated relationship in my life was with a lumber supplier who never returned calls on time. I want you to picture the scene the way I saw it, because the details matter. Balloons tied to the mailbox, a rented popcorn machine humming on the porch, 40 or 50 people spread across a backyard that smelled like charcoal and cut grass. All of them there to celebrate Tyler Bennett graduating high school with a scholarship he earned partly because I spent 2 summers teaching him how to frame a wall, wire a panel, and show up on time even when he didn't feel like it. He called me his mentor. His teachers called me a good influence. I just called it Tuesday. I was standing near the fence, holding a paper plate I wasn't eating from, doing what I always do at parties, which is exist quietly at the edges and hope nobody asks me to make small talk about the weather. I'm not good at rooms full of people. I'm good at jobs. Give me a blueprint and a deadline, and I'll hand you a finished house. Give me a crowd of parents holding wine coolers, and I turn into furniture. That's where Diane found me. She came through the side gate in a green dress that didn't try hard to be noticed, and somehow was the only thing I noticed. Her dark hair pulled back, sunglasses pushed up on her head, moving through the yard the way a woman moves when she's hosting and hurting and hiding both at once. I knew her, the way you know a client's mother, polite nods at pickup, a signed check for materials, a thank you text after Tyler passed his first solo wiring test. 41 years old, recently divorced. According to Tyler's careless mention of my dad's new apartment, I never asked questions. It wasn't my business. She walked past me toward the drink table, said my name like she always does. Easy, unremarkable, David. And for half a second our shoulders brushed close enough that I smelled something warm underneath the sunscreen, something that didn't belong at a graduation party. I didn't think anything of it, not yet. Then her hand found mine. Quick, almost clumsy, like she practiced the motion in a mirror and still couldn't make it look natural. Something small and folded pressed into my palm, a paper napkin gone soft at the edges like it had been held too long before she found the courage to let go of it. She didn't stop walking, didn't look back, just kept moving toward the cooler like nothing had happened, laughing a second later at something someone said, perfectly composed, perfectly normal, while my hand closed around 4 words I hadn't read yet and already couldn't stop shaking over. I stood there holding a stranger's secret disguised as a napkin, aware of every eye in that backyard except the one pair I actually wanted looking at me. My throat went dry. My pulse did something it hadn't done in years, and somewhere behind the porch, Tyler was laughing with his friends, completely unaware that his mother had just handed his mentor a message that was about to unravel every quiet, careful boundary I had built my whole life around. To understand how I ended up in that backyard holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than it should, you have to go back 2 years to a job that was supposed to last 6 weeks and somehow never really ended. I was 38 then too, just further from whatever this was going to become. My divorce had been finalized about 8 months earlier, and I had settled into the kind of life divorced men warn other divorced men about without meaning to. Takeout containers stacked like a small skyline on my counter. A house too quiet for someone who used to complain about noise. I filled the hours with work because work didn't ask questions and it didn't need explanations for why I flinched when someone mentioned anniversaries. Diane found me through a neighbor who'd used my crew for a kitchen remodel. She called on a Tuesday, told me her back porch was falling apart and her son kept threatening to fix it himself, which she said like a warning. He's 16 and confident, she told me over the phone. Confidence and a circular saw don't mix. I laughed for the first time in what felt like a month. When I showed up to quote the job, Tyler answered the door before his mother could. Lanky kid, all elbows and opinions, already asking me what kind of wood I'd use and why, like he'd spent the morning reading forums just to test me. I liked him instantly. There was something unguarded about him that reminded me of who I used to be before life taught me to measure my words. Diane came out wiping her hands on a dish towel, hair pulled back, looking like a woman who ran on caffeine and stubbornness. She didn't flirt. She didn't perform. She just talked to me like I was a person worth talking to, which, after months of feeling invisible, hit harder than I expected. The porch job turned into cabinet repairs. The cabinet repairs turned into a bathroom remodel. Somewhere in there, dinner invitations started happening, casual at first. An extra plate because you're already here turned into a standing sort of arrangement neither of us named out loud. Tyler started shadowing me on weekends, handing me tools before I asked, asking questions about angles and load-bearing walls with a hunger most teenagers reserve for video games. I taught him how to read a level, how to swing a hammer without breaking his wrist, how to measure twice before he made a mistake he couldn't undo. He absorbed it the way some kids absorb music. Diane would sit on the porch steps some evenings with 2 mugs of coffee, one for her, one placed silently beside me without a word exchanged, like it had become understood between us. We talk about nothing important. Weather. Tyler's grades. A book she was reading that she said was fine but predictable, delivered with a smirk that told me she'd read the ending twice just to be sure. There was nothing to those nights except the quiet kind of comfort neither of us admitted we needed. I told myself it was friendship, the kind that happens when loneliness finds another loneliness and neither one names it. She never brought up her own marriage, and I never asked. Some silences are agreements. 2 years slipped by like that. Easy dinners, easy laughter, a boy growing taller under my guidance and a woman growing steadier in a house that had clearly held more grief than she let on. I never once let myself consider what any of it meant. Not until that napkin. It started, I think, with the coffee. Small thing, nothing anyone would notice. I'd finish a job around the house, some cabinet hinge or a leaking faucet under the sink, and instead of packing up right away, I'd end up sitting at that kitchen counter while Diane made 2 cups instead of 1. She never asked if I wanted to stay. She just made the second cup, set it down across from her stool, and that was the invitation. No words needed. I told myself it was just what neighbors did, what friends did. But neighbors don't remember how you take your coffee without asking twice. Tyler noticed before I did, in his own teenage way. He'd walk into the kitchen at 10 at night for a snack and find the 2 of us still talking, the dishes long done, the television off in the other room, and he'd just shake his head and mutter something like, "You 2 are worse than my study group," before disappearing back upstairs. He meant it as a joke. I remember laughing it off, but there was a beat right after, a half second where Diane's eyes flicked to mine, and neither of us knew what to do with the silence that followed. The conversations got longer as the months went on. We talked about her ex-husband's absence in careful, clipped sentences that told me more by what she left out than what she said. We talked about my divorce, how quiet the house got afterward, how I'd learned to cook for one and hated every bite of it. She listened in a way most people don't anymore. Without reaching for her phone, without waiting for her turn to speak. I started noticing the small things about her voice, how it dropped lower when she was tired, how she laughed with her whole chest instead of just her mouth. One night in early spring, I was fixing a squeaky door hinge that didn't really need fixing, an excuse to stay another hour, and she came up behind me holding 2 glasses of wine like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You work too much," she said, handing me one. "Sit down before you fall down." I sat. We talked until almost midnight about nothing important, and when I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door and, for just a second, her hand rested on my arm a beat longer than a friendly goodbye required. I noticed it. I know she did too. Neither of us said a word. There were moments like that scattered through those months, small accidental touches, glances held 1 second past comfortable, sentences that trailed off right before they became something neither of us was ready to name. I'd catch myself thinking about her at odd hours, driving home from other job sites, wondering what she was doing, whether Tyler had eaten, whether she was sitting alone at that counter with a second cup of coffee going cold across from an empty stool. I told myself it was concern, just concern for a friend. She must have told herself something similar, because whenever the air between us got too thick, too charged, she'd change the subject fast, ask about a client, mention Tyler's homework, anything to pull us back onto solid, deniable ground. We were 2 careful people building a wall out of unspoken rules, brick by brick, and telling ourselves it would hold forever. It didn't. The morning of the graduation party, I told myself I'd stay for an hour, congratulate Tyler, help Diane carry a few folding tables, and leave before anyone had a chance to read too much into why I was there at all. That plan lasted about 11 minutes. The backyard was already full by the time I arrived. String lights zigzagging between the fence posts, a rented popcorn machine humming next to the grill, and Tyler's friends spilling out of the house in graduation gowns they refused to take off even though the ceremony had ended hours earlier. Diane was everywhere at once, refilling drinks, adjusting the banner that kept sagging in the middle, laughing loudly at jokes that weren't that funny because that's what hosts do. I found a spot near the fence and made myself useful flipping burgers, mostly so I'd have a reason to be holding something. That's when her ex-husband showed up. I'd heard about Richard before, mostly in the careful, neutral tone people use when a subject still has teeth. He walked in wearing sunglasses he didn't take off, holding the hand of a woman who looked barely older than Tyler's classmates, and the entire backyard seemed to tilt half a degree in his direction. Diane's smile didn't drop, but something behind her eyes did. She hugged him stiffly, said something polite, and I watched Tyler's shoulders climb up toward his ears the second his father's laugh boomed across the yard. I stood there flipping a burger that didn't need flipping, feeling like a stagehand who'd wandered into someone else's play. I wasn't family. I wasn't an ex. I wasn't even really a guest, not in the way that mattered, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt the full weight of that word, outsider, settle right between my shoulder blades. Richard found me near the drink table at some point, clapped my shoulder like we were old friends and said, "You're the contractor, right? Diane mentioned you fixed up the place real nice." He said it the way people compliment a service, not a person. And I nodded and said something forgettable, and he moved on to charm someone else. I looked across the yard and found Diane already looking back at me, just for a second, before she turned to laugh at something his girlfriend said. I didn't know what that look meant. I still don't, fully, but it felt like being handed something heavy without a word of instruction. Tyler found me by the fence later, tie loosened, cap tucked under one arm. "Thanks for coming, man," he said. "Means a lot. You've been more helpful than half the people my dad calls family." I told him he earned every bit of tonight and meant it, and for a moment the noise of the party fell away, and it was just the two of us, the way it used to be on job sites 2 summers ago. Then Diane called him over for photos, and the crowd swallowed him whole again. I was gathering used cups off a side table, half ready to slip out unnoticed, when she appeared beside me, closer than the moment required. She didn't say anything. She just pressed something small and folded into my hand, her fingers lingering half a second too long against my palm, and walked away before I could ask what it was. I unfolded the napkin right there, heart already outrunning the noise around me. 4 words. That's all it was. Not a paragraph, not an explanation, just 4 words in handwriting I recognized from years of seeing it on grocery lists and Tyler's permission slips. "Meet me. Not tonight." I stood there holding a napkin like it might combust, and for a second I forgot how to be a person at a party. Someone bumped my shoulder, said something about the grill running low on propane, and I just nodded like that meant anything to me. My whole body had gone somewhere else. Meet me. Not tonight. 4 words, and somehow they managed to be both an invitation and a warning at the same time. I read it maybe 15 times before I trusted myself to fold it back up and shove it into my pocket like it was evidence of a crime I hadn't committed yet. Part of me wanted to laugh because it felt absurd. A grown man rereading a napkin like a teenager passing notes in class. Another part of me wanted to find her right there in the crowd and ask what she meant. When? Where? Why now? Why like this? But she'd made herself scarce on purpose. I caught one glimpse of her near the dessert table, laughing at something her sister said, acting like she hadn't just detonated something in my chest. That was the thing about Diane. She could carry 2 completely different realities in her hands at once, and never let either one spill. I left the party not long after that, mumbling something about an early job in the morning, which wasn't even a lie, just suddenly irrelevant. I drove home with the radio off, the napkin sitting on the passenger seat like it had its own gravitational pull. I must have looked at it 4 times at red lights, like the words might rearrange themselves into something safer. The next few days were their own kind of torture. I went to job sites and measured things twice that I would normally measure once. I answered client calls in half sentences. My foreman asked if I was feeling all right, and I told him it was allergies, which was a poor excuse in the middle of summer with clear skies for a week straight. At night I lay in bed running through possibilities like a man trying to defuse something without knowing which wire mattered. Maybe she wanted to apologize for a moment of weakness. Maybe she wanted to make sure I understood boundaries, formally, in person, so there'd be no confusion. Maybe it was something else entirely, something I didn't let myself finish imagining, because it felt too dangerous to hope for. 4 days passed without a word. I nearly convinced myself the napkin had been some strange lapse, a slip of vulnerability she regretted the moment she walked away. I even started rehearsing how I'd act normal again if she never brought it up, how I'd go back to being the guy who fixed her fence gate and drank coffee at her kitchen island, like none of this had ever cracked the surface. Then, on the 5th evening, my phone lit up while I was scrubbing sawdust off my hands in the garage sink. Her name on the screen looked heavier than it should have. I stared at it 2 rings longer than necessary before I answered, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "Hey," she said, quiet, careful, like she was testing whether the ground between us was still solid. "Are you free Thursday? There's a place outside town, quiet. I think we should talk." Thursday came slower than any day had a right to move. I told myself I wouldn't overthink what to wear, then stood in front of my closet for 10 minutes like it mattered. Like flannel versus button-down was going to decide the rest of my life. The place she picked sat off a county road outside town, a little diner with a gravel lot and a neon sign missing its cue, the kind of spot where nobody from our neighborhood would ever wander in by accident. That alone told me how carefully she'd thought this through. She was already in a corner booth when I walked in, hands wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from, and for a second neither of us said anything. Just looked at each other like 2 people checking if the version they'd been imagining matched the one sitting across the table. "Thanks for coming," she said finally. "You didn't give me much choice," I said, trying for light, missing by a little. She almost smiled, then let it fall. I keep starting sentences in my head and none of them sound right out loud. So I gave her the opening. "Then just say the true one." She wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. "Tyler worships you. You know that. If he ever thought for 1 second that his mother and his best friend were—" She stopped, shook her head. "I don't even have a word for it that doesn't sound ugly." "It's not ugly," I said, quieter than I meant. "Try telling that to the neighborhood," she said. "You know what they'll call me. The mom who couldn't wait for her son to move out before she went after his friend. That's the story they'll tell at every barbecue for the next 10 years. And I'll have to sit there and smile through it." I didn't argue, because she wasn't wrong. I'd built houses in this town for 15 years. I knew exactly how fast a rumor could travel through drywall. "And your ex," I added, because someone had to. "He's not exactly going to stay quiet either." "He'll use it," she said flatly. "Custody's not an issue anymore. Tyler's grown, but he'll use it anyway. Just to make me feel small. That's what he does." The waitress came, refilled coffee neither of us wanted, left again. Diane traced the rim of her mug with one finger, not looking at me. "So tell me to walk away," I said. "If that's what tonight is, tell me now, and I'll never bring it up again. I mean that." She looked up fast, like the offer had cost her something to hear. "That's the problem. I don't want you to walk away. I've wanted the opposite for longer than I've been willing to admit, and that terrifies me more than the gossip does." Something in my chest loosened and tightened at the same time. "Then what are we actually deciding here? Whether we're brave enough to be honest," she said, "or smart enough to stay safe, because I don't think we get both." I thought about 2 years of dinners, of late nights on her porch steps when Tyler was asleep upstairs, of every moment I talked myself out of what I was feeling because it was easier than facing it. "I'm done being smart," I said. "I've been smart since my divorce. It's made me lonely, not happy." Diane's eyes glossed, but she blinked it back, composing herself the way she always did in front of me, like she couldn't let the crack show fully even now. "Then we tell no one yet," she said. "Not until we know what this even is. Deal?" "Deal," I said, and reached across the table, my hand finding hers before either of us decided it was allowed. 3 weeks passed before I understood how loud silence could be. Diane and I had our deal, and for a while, deals like that feel simple in the daylight and impossible at 2 in the morning. We met twice, always somewhere far enough from her neighborhood that nobody would recognize her car in the lot. A diner off the highway once, a bookstore cafe another time, sitting across from each other like strangers pretending not to know how the other person took their coffee. It should have felt like sneaking. Instead, it felt like being handed something I'd forgotten I wanted. Then Tyler called me. I almost didn't answer. Some part of me flinching at his name on the screen like it might expose everything through the phone line itself, but he was just Tyler. Same easy voice he'd always had, asking if I could help him figure out a leaking pipe in his new apartment near campus, then drifting, the way 22-year-olds do, into talking about a girl in his marketing class who probably wasn't interested, but who he kind of couldn't stop thinking about. I gave him advice. Told him to just ask her to coffee, stop overthinking it, that overthinking a woman was the fastest way to lose her to someone less careful. The whole time I talked, I felt the weight of the irony sitting in my chest like a stone. I was coaching a man on how to pursue a woman while quietly falling for his mother. When we hung up, I sat in my truck outside a hardware store for 10 minutes doing nothing, just staring at the steering wheel, wondering how many more conversations like that I could survive without my voice cracking. The complication I hadn't expected came from Richard, Diane's ex-husband, fresh off his appearance at the party with his younger girlfriend trailing behind him like an accessory. Called me directly one afternoon. He wanted a quote on renovating the guest house at his new place across town. Said Tyler had recommended me, said he trusted my work. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, half convinced this was some kind of test, though I couldn't say from who. Richard didn't know anything. He couldn't have. But something about being pulled back into Diane's orbit through her ex-husband felt like fate laughing at the careful walls we'd built. I told him I'd think about it. I hadn't decided by the time I saw Diane again. She noticed something was wrong the second I sat down across from her, in a booth at a place 2 towns over, the vinyl seat cold under me despite the summer heat outside. "You're somewhere else," she said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. I told her about Richard's call. Watched her face shift from surprise to something tighter, more guarded. "He does this," she said quietly. "Circles back into my life whenever he senses I've moved on to something he can't control." I asked her how he could sense anything when there was nothing to sense yet. She looked at me for a long moment, long enough that the waitress had to ask twice to answer. I sat there and let the silence do what silence does, which is tell the truth faster than words can. Diane wasn't asking me to fix Richard. She was asking me to prove I wasn't another man who'd disappear the moment things got complicated. So I stayed, not just that day at the diner, but the weeks after. The ordinary weeks nobody makes movies about. I fixed the loose step on her porch that I'd been meaning to get to since the renovation. She started leaving a second coffee cup out before I even asked. Small things. Quiet things. The kind of things that don't announce themselves as love, but somehow build the whole house of it anyway. Tyler came home for winter break that December, and I remember standing in the driveway wondering if he'd look at me differently. He didn't throw a fit. He didn't storm off. He just looked at his mother, then at me, and said, "So this is a thing now?" Like he'd already made peace with it before we had. Diane laughed, nervous, relieved. I told him I still owed him a game of one-on-one, and something about that broke the tension in his shoulders. He said, "Yeah, okay, but don't get weird at Thanksgiving." That was it. That was the whole conversation. Sometimes the biggest moments in life arrive smaller than you expect. The neighbors talked, of course. Diane told me about it over dinner one night, half laughing, half wincing. Mrs. Alvarez, 2 doors down, had apparently told someone at the grocery store that Diane had robbed the cradle, which was funny considering I'm 38 and not exactly fresh out of college. Diane shrugged it off faster than I expected. "People need something to talk about," she said. "Might as well be us." I watched her say that with a kind of steadiness I hadn't seen in her before, like she'd finally stopped asking permission to be happy. Richard called twice more that spring. Both times, Diane picked up, spoke calmly, and hung up without the tightness in her jaw I used to see. Whatever hold he thought he still had, it was fading, piece by piece, replaced by something he couldn't circle back into. Now, almost a year after that graduation party, I think about the napkin more than I probably should. 4 words on a scrap of paper, folded so many times it had gone soft at the creases. I still have it, tucked in a drawer I don't open often, not because I need reminding, but because some things deserve to stay exactly where they started. People ask me sometimes how it happened, like there's a formula they can copy. I never have a clean answer. All I know is that most of life comes down to timing you don't control and courage you didn't know you had until the moment demanded it. Diane could have stayed silent that night. I could have thrown the napkin away and told myself it meant nothing. Neither of us did. That's the whole story, really. Not fate, not magic. Just two people willing to risk an awkward truth instead of a comfortable lie. If you've ever wondered whether you missed your moment, maybe you didn't. Maybe it's still folded up somewhere, waiting for you to open it. If this story pulled at something in you, stay a while longer. There's another one queued up right after this, and trust me, you'll want to see where it goes. Subscribe if you haven't, so you don't miss it.